Bienvenue, benvenuti, and welcome to Expatriotical, the podcast for expats, travelers, and other adventurous souls. I'm Chandra Alley, and after living as an expat with my husband and 4 children in 2 different countries for 7 years, I've learned the arts of pivoting during pitfalls, traveling tastefully for less, and soaking in amazing new cultures without losing your own. Join me as we dive into the joys and challenges of travel and the expat life in every episode. Hey guys, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that I'm here and we've got another episode. I've got so much to catch you up on, and it's so good to be back talking to you today, which is, as I was writing this, the first day of school. But regardless of whichever day you listen on, I hope that you had an amazing summer. I wish that this was more of a conversation so I could ask you personally how things went for you this summer. My plan for this episode is to tell you how my summer was, and then to tell you a couple of really big things that are going to be coming up, both of which are good. But I'm not going to do, I don't want to call it a bait and switch, but I'm not going to do what I did in the last episode 67, where I talked about one thing and then I told you I didn't know if I was coming back. I'm definitely coming back, but I just want to tell you about that in more detail at the end of the episode. So for us, this summer was super busy and definitely not like last summer 2024. I'm going to be really honest and tell you that this summer, unlike last summer where I cried, like I teared up because my kids had to go back to school because we had such an amazing and sweet time together. Maybe that was due to the Olympics. Maybe that was due to family coming out prior to us going to America and adventuring with them. And it could definitely have been due to the fact that it was the first summer where I didn't have a child that needed to nap, and we could stay out and do things later in the day and didn't have to be pressed for bedtime. And it was really wonderful. But this summer was definitely not the same in the kid regard. It was still great, especially the first part when we were in America, but the last month, especially, if I'm completely transparent with you, my kids fought like cats and dogs. So for 2 weeks, I prayed and prayed that it would change, and after praying about it for those 2 weeks, I just gave up and gave in and realized that this summer was not going to be like last summer, and that's okay. Needless to say, I was very excited when the first day of school arrived, and honestly, they were excited too. For us, summer looked like us taking our kids out of school an hour early on the very last day, which meant they were leaving at 11:30 instead of 12:30 because it's always a half day on the last day, having them change clothes, and then heading to the airport to catch a flight from Paris to San Francisco. Every summer, we try to do a little bit of a vacation before we go back to see our families. For example, our first year as expats, we flew to London and stayed there for 3 or 4 days, which was absolutely magical for me because I'd always wanted to go to London. And then we flew to LA and saw that side of my family, and then to Colorado to see the rest of our family. So this year, when we were looking and planning, we saw that Air France had a great deal on tickets round trip from Paris to San Francisco. We don't have any family in San Francisco, but we thought, we could fly there and then drive down to LA. So that's pretty much what we did. It was a fantastic flight, and we arrived in San Francisco around 6 p.m. on the same day, and we got our rental car, went to our hotel, ordered a bit of food, showered, and completely knocked out by, I would say by 10 o'clock. But by about 5 or 5:30 in the morning, everybody was up and at 'em. And so we were ready to go. We went down, we had an early breakfast, packed up, and we were on the highway, headed to do some sightseeing by 8 o'clock in the morning. First, we went to the Painted Ladies, which are famous houses that were most notably seen in the sitcom Full House, which my husband Chris and I grew up watching. Then we drove down the steep and twisty-turny Lombard Street, which my kids absolutely loved. And at the end of that street, We made a left turn, and there before us, framed by all these cool houses, was Alcatraz Island, sitting in the middle of the bay. Next, we headed to Fisherman's Wharf, which was still pretty sleepy since it was only about 9:30 in the morning. We walked around and explored. We saw the famous sea lions of Pier 39, and then we walked down Pier 39, sampling some delicious homemade miniature donuts and enjoying the quaint shops and restaurants. Just looking, we didn't eat any more there. Then we headed to Ghirardelli Chocolate Factory, where everyone got to pick out their own flavor to try, plus some extras, of course. And finally, we headed back to the center of the wharf where the kiosk cafes had just opened up, so I could buy a cup of clam chowder with sourdough bread, which I thought was very yummy, but no one else wanted to try or agreed. But maybe that's because 10:30 in the morning is too early for clam chowder for some people. I don't know, but I loved it. Next, we hopped back in the car and headed to the Golden Gate Bridge Pavilion, where we parked and got some great photos of the bridge. Finally, we got back in the car and drove over what was once the longest bridge in the world back in 1937 when it was built. You may be wondering why we only spent such a short amount of time in San Francisco. Well, one reason is because we had quite a drive ahead of us and we had multiple stops that we needed to make before we got to LA. After seeing San Francisco, we headed out of town and just past Sacramento to spend the evening with my great aunt and great uncle, having dinner and celebrating what happened to be their 77th wedding anniversary. This was something that I had prayed for to happen, as Chris and my 3 boys had never met my uncle or aunt, and Lilia hadn't seen them since she was 1 year old. The food was delicious. It was made by my wonderful cousins, which are the daughters of my aunt and uncle, and the company and conversation was fantastic. And it was just so sweet to see the multiple generations mingling and mixing and getting to know one another. After that, we drove a very short way to stay the night in our hotel and headed to our next destination, which was Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Parks, where the world's largest trees reside. A lot of this was new for Chris and the kids. I had been to San Francisco in my very early 20s, and I had been camping in Kings Canyon National Park a couple of times in my childhood, but getting to see the looks on their faces, especially when they saw those big, beautiful, glorious trees, was pretty wonderful. I may have said it on the podcast before, but I love trees. I'm not sure why, but there's something about them that makes me feel alive and gives me a certain feeling of peace. So getting to go amongst these living giants for another time was amazing. Chris and I hiked around the park with the kids like we were kids. A natural sense of adventure just came out of us as we stepped out of the car and into this forest of giants. We could have spent days there, but due to there being no availability when we had booked the trip, we didn't even get to stay the night there. And so we just had those few precious hours of hiking in the park and then drove out of the park and south to our hotel. And then the next day we got up and had breakfast and drove down to LA, where my amazing aunt was kindly organizing everything for us to have a few hours of family time with my dad's side of my family, eating pizza and fried chicken and just enjoying a late lunch with lots of laughs and hugs and catching up. And of course, we can never go to LA without going to the beach. So the next day, we met up with some dear friends and had a beachside barbecue and dipped our toes in the water. Literally, that is all I really wanted to do, was dip my toes in, because it was windy and it felt pretty cold to me, but the kids had a blast swimming, splashing, and playing in the sand with their friends. The next day, we went to have a delicious lunch at my uncle's house and was surprised by my younger cousin being there with her 2 kids, whom I had never met before. And it was so sweet to see her son play with Caleb and get to hold her beautiful baby girl. It was a precious time with family that day and the whole trip in California, and I was so very thankful to have gotten to see them all. We got on a plane that evening and flew to Denver, where we stayed the night in a hotel right by a Costco so we could get up and grab things for the next 2 weeks in Colorado. And a delightful surprise that we gave to the kids was when we went to eat breakfast in the morning. My dear friend Marnie, yes, the same Marnie whom, if you've been listening to the podcast from the beginning, bailed me out when we first became expats in Italy and were living in a hotel and had no way to do our laundry, by letting me, who was a perfect stranger at the time, come with my 3-year-old Carson and 1.5-year-old Isaiah and wash laundry in her temporary accommodation apartment. Marnie and the kids had not seen each other for about 3 years or so, and it was so wonderful to get to spend just over an hour together, even though most of that time was her graciously walking through Costco as we picked up snacks and other things like shorts that we would need later on the trip. We spent the next 6 days or so with my mom and my grandma and my sweet nephew swimming, celebrating the 4th of July with fireworks, which is something that my kids hadn't done in a long, long time. And then playing in the park. We had a delicious Mexican food dinner at a restaurant, which is going to be our Shan Select for this episode. So stay tuned to the end of the episode with more of my family, whom I have to say I really appreciated that they took the time out of their busy schedules and busy summers and came just to have dinner with us. It was very special, and I felt very blessed. And then we went up to the mountains one of the next days, the day after 4th of July, and spent the afternoon with my Uncle Sean and Aunt Tammy. You guys, I absolutely love when we get to go up there. The kids play with their dogs. They got to ride 4-wheelers this time. We had delicious food, and we just get to be outside in nature, and my kids get to taste a little bit of what I grew up with, and we just enjoy their wonderful company, and I love it. Then we headed down to the ranch, which is what we call Chris's parents' house, and dropped the 3 oldest kids off because we had to make a quick trip to Texas, which, to summarize, we got to explore Fort Worth more than we had ever explored when we lived just a few minutes away for 3 years. So it was great. We got to poke our noses into our current storage facility, which we hadn't seen the contents of for almost 7 years. And that was very nostalgic. And then we got to, for the first time ever, due to weather, sit on the tarmac for 5 hours on a plane. Let's just say I got a lot of good reading in that day. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I got to run into an old mentor of mine. She was my boss when I very first went to university, and we happened to be at the airport at the same time when we headed to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and that was truly really special and sweet. And the rest of our time, we just spent with our family. Well, Chris's side of the family at the ranch, running through sprinklers. Well, that was the kids. I did not run through the sprinkler. Working on projects, going to the swimming pool a lot, and eating delicious food. It was really wonderful. And to cap off our time in Colorado, we got to stay the night with Chris's cousin in Denver and just had a really great time chatting and being nostalgic. When we got back to France on July 19th, we were here for only a couple of days when Chris had to turn around and go back to California for 10 days for work. So I spent those 10 days trying to fill my kids' summer with as much fun as I could. I took them to the pool, as the pool in our town had been closed for a year and a half due to remodeling, and I had promised that I would take them at least once in the summer. Promise kept. I took them to the movies. I took them to the arcade, to different parks, to get gelato. We did lots and lots of things. And if I'm really honest, and I'm not trying to embarrass them, their behavior wasn't great at that point. So I decided to stop spending money on not so great behavior. And then I feel like I can pretty much say that's when a lot of the sibling fighting began. Maybe I should have rethought that midway through the next month and started taking them to do more stuff, but hindsight is 2020. Anyway, when Chris got back, we started doing other things that we had not done yet in Paris. For 3 years, Chris had wanted to go to the top of the Arc de Triomphe. I'm not sure why I hadn't really cared much about that. Maybe it's because we had already been to the top of the Eiffel Tower and the top of the Hyatt Hotel in the 17th arrondissement or 17th district, both of which places you can get fantastic views of Paris. But I am sure glad that we went to the top of the arch because the view was definitely different from it and had its own vantage point, and it was really cool. And then a bit later, towards the middle of August, we took one last trip to Italy, visiting Milan and the Cascina, where all 4 of my kids can remember enjoying their childhood. And then we also visited Cinque Terre, which is currently my favorite place in the whole wide world. You can listen to episode 9, Lost in Translation. And if you want to fast forward, I suggest the whole episode because it's kind of funny. But at the end there, the Shan Select is Cinque Terre. And we stayed right on the beach. It had a gorgeous view, and we did the very last hike that we had yet to do. Because if you're not familiar with Cinque Terre, there are 5 gorgeous little towns that are nestled on the hills / cliff sides of the Ligurian Sea, and you can hike from each town to the next. And we had done all the hikes except for the hike from Corniglia to Manarola, which in my opinion ended up being the hardest of all of the hikes we had ever done. But we made it, and everybody immediately went and got in the water afterwards and swam and cooled off. And then we had a very late lunch, and it was amazing. And after that trip, we got back to Paris and have spent the rest of the time just doing regular stuff, reading books for assigned summer reading, going to parks, and let's be honest, for all of the parents that are out there listening, just surviving. You may be wondering, why did you say one last visit to Italy, Chandra? And that leads me to my next topic for the podcast, which is also the reason why Chris had to turn around 2 days later and go back to California after we had come back to America in July. It's because we are moving to Singapore. Honestly, in July, we just knew we were moving, but we didn't know where. And then we found out we were moving to Singapore. And then a couple of weeks later, we found out in the timeline, and we will be moving in December. We are super excited. I think we've watched several dozen YouTube videos about Singapore, and the kids already have lots of plans about going to hawker markets and Universal Studios and getting food. But personally, I'm just trying to take it step by step and do the next right / most urgent thing. And those things right now look like applying for schools, selling our car, and then starting to go through our entire apartment room by room to get rid of things we don't need anymore. That is actually a subject or topic for a podcast that I had already written down. So I might delve in and get more involved with that in a later episode, but we'll see if I have time. This is the first time we've done a mid-year move. So when I say mid-year, I mean mid-school year. So it's going to be a little more challenging than when you do it with the whole breadth of the summer ahead of you. And that leads me to my third point, which really goes hand in hand and will really suit the next season in life for me. And that is that Expatriotical is no longer going to be a weekly podcast. When I sat down to write this episode and just to jump back into it, because it's been 3 months since I've done an episode, I was really excited. And that's a good thing because I was really burnt out and a bit discouraged at the end of last season. Actually, I just stumbled upon that. This can be season 2 or the start of season 2 of Expatriotical. But I think I realized that part of my burnout was just the weekly demand when life was getting really busy with the kids and everything. So I'm going to be stepping back or stepping down to once a month. And if I'm feeling really energetic, twice a month, releasing episodes for the podcast. I still, of course, plan to bring you great content and things that I hope will be entertaining and also applicable to your own lives. But it will also be a lot more manageable for me in this season as we prepare for a big move to a country and a continent that we have never been to. One last thing that I want to say, and it's taking me a long time to get to this place because I never like to exclude people, but I normally ask you to share the podcast with someone you think would find it useful or would like it, or that it would be helpful for. And I'm still going to ask you to do that, but I do realize that this podcast tends to probably speak more so to the CIPs or completely not irresistible, completely irreplaceable partners, probably better known as the accompanying spouse or accompanying expat partner. So if you have a friend in your life that is new to being an expat, or maybe they're not new and they just need some encouragement, would you please share this episode or maybe the very first episode with her or him? I'd really appreciate it. Okay, now let's jump into this week's Shan Select. I actually thought of this restaurant as a Shan Select back in December when we went back for Christmas for the very first time since being expats. We ate there. It's a restaurant in a little known small city in Colorado called Pueblo, and it's called the Cactus Flower. It has amazing margaritas, but we don't really go there for the drinks. It has some of the best homemade, regional, traditional, delicious Mexican food ever. In fact, it's so regional that other than in New Mexico and a little bit of Arizona and maybe Utah, for those that are not familiar with America, like the actual geography, because it's a really big country, those 4 states represent the states that encompass what is known as the Four Corners, which is the one place in America where you can stand in 4 states at one time. Anyway, you're not going to find this type of Mexican food anywhere else in the country other than in this region, and it is just some of the best Mexican food, from chile rellenos to a plethora of different types of enchiladas, chimichangas, you name it, they have it, and it's amazing. And green chili, I cannot forget the green chili. I will be sure to put their website in the show notes, and as always, I am not an affiliate, just a big Mexican food fan. And now for our quote of the day. The author of this is unknown, and I've honestly never heard it before looking for a quote for this episode, but I really like it. It goes like this. "It's impossible," said pride. "It's risky," said experience. "It's pointless," said reason. "Give it a try," whispered the heart. That's it for this episode, everyone. I will see you again at the beginning of next month, and I should have lots of things to tell you about as we prepare for our big move to Singapore. Until then, enjoy the beginning of autumn weather if you are in the northern hemisphere, that is, and the beginning of spring if you are south of the equator. Thanks again for listening, guys. This is Chandra Ali saying see you soon and reminding you to live and travel in the know with Expatriotical.